When you stop feeding them, their world begins to melt and they don't even understand why. At first comes confusion. A strange emptiness replaces the familiar energy they used to drain from you. They can't comprehend your silence. They can't understand why your eyes no longer plead, why your heart no longer burns with reaction. To a narcissist, love was never an emotion. It was power disguised as affection. They needed you to feel real, the way an actor needs an audience. But when you stop, when you no longer explain, resist, or prove, they suddenly find themselves standing before a mirror that reflects nothing back. The entire illusion of their greatness begins to crack. Your silence becomes the most terrifying sound because it forces them to face the emptiness they've always run from. Jung once said, "The shadow holds power only until it is seen." And that is exactly what's happening. When you withdraw your energy, you take with you the mirror that once sustained their illusion. They don't just lose you, they lose the image of themselves they once believed was real. And in that moment, the storm within them begins to rise. Not because love was lost, but because power has vanished. Not because they miss you, but because they no longer know who they are when you're no longer there to reflect them. Stage 1. Confusion. When they realize the fuel has run out, at first they're not angry, they're just unsettled. Something feels off. Everything that once felt familiar now seems strangely empty. Their messages go unanswered. Their jokes fall flat, and their usual emotional triggers no longer spark a reaction. In their mind, a string of questions begins to spin. What's wrong with her? What game is he playing? Why is it so silent this time? A narcissist lives within an energetic ecosystem where every reaction you give is fuel for their ego. When you're happy, they feel powerful. When you cry, they feel significant. When you explain, they know they still have control. But now you no longer respond. They throw a stone into the lake, and the water stays still. That disturbs them more than hatred ever could. In depth psychology, Jung once said, "The ego collapses when it is no longer mirrored by the world." Your silence marks the moment they lose the mirror that once made them believe they were special. They start testing the waters, sending small messages, recalling old memories, dropping pity lines. But behind those words lies not affection, but investigation. Do I still have influence over you? This confusion isn't simple sadness, it's identity disorientation. Because for them, without someone to reflect them back, they don't know who they are. When you fall silent, they don't just lose control over you, they lose their own psychological compass. And that's only the beginning. From this confusion, they'll do everything in their power to feel alive again. The storm is still gathering behind that calm. Stage 2, experimentation. When they begin testing new limits, after the initial confusion and loss of direction, the narcissist enters the second stage, experimentation. This is when they stop merely observing your silence and start acting step by step to see if they still hold emotional influence over you. In their mind, a voice whispers, "Impossible. This person never leaves me." They can't believe you've truly awakened, because for so long you were predictable, the one who always responded. You cried, pleaded, explained, tried to make them understand. To them, you were the most loyal mirror. They believe that one gentle touch will make you revert to your old self. And so they begin testing the system. First come the subtle experiments, disguised as ordinary gestures. A harmless text, "Just wanted to see if you're okay." A seemingly caring question, "How have you been?" Or a birthday greeting, a comment on an old post, a deliberate scene. To them, these are not acts of affection, they're emotional tests. They watch closely. Will you reply? Will you flinch? Will you show any emotion? Even a small sign, an emoji, a greeting, a short message is enough for them to feel powerful again. If you don't respond, they raise the dosage. They shift tactics from gentle to provocative, from pity to blame. One day, "I miss you. No one understands me like you do." The next, "I've met someone new. You were never that special." It's not contradiction, it's calibration. Every reaction you give is data, and they adjust accordingly. When you stay silent, their patience begins to crack. Outwardly, they appear fine, posting cheerful pictures, projecting energy, pretending they've moved on long ago. But inside, there's restlessness, a gnawing self-doubt they've never felt before. Because for a narcissist, your silence is not just the end of a relationship, it's the erasure of the identity they worked so hard to fabricate. They begin to swing between anger and addiction. Angry because you no longer obey the old script. Addicted because they still crave control. They stalk your social media, watch who interacts with you, analyze every caption, every facial expression, trying to decode whether you're happy or hurting. Every time they see you peaceful, they feel a sting as if you've betrayed the role of the victim they assigned you. In Jungian psychology, this is the moment when the shadow begins to resist the light. When they realize they can no longer control you, their repressed unconscious fear of abandonment, shame, emptiness, childhood wounds starts to surface. But instead of facing it, they transmute it into subtler manipulation. They might feign weakness to trigger your empathy. I just want forgiveness. Or play on your guilt. If you don't reply, I'm afraid I might do something stupid. They might even act remorseful. I've really changed this time. All of it has one purpose: to extract a reaction from you. To them, you are not a person, you are a mirror, an energy source, a gauge of their power. If you respond even slightly, they'll seize the moment, reignite old charm, and make you believe this time it's different. But it's just the same cycle, and this time you'll fall deeper because you'll mistake regression for renewal. But if you remain silent, something else begins to happen. They lose internal control. Their emotions grow extreme. The initial confusion morphs into obsession. They feel invisible, and that triggers their deepest fear, the terror of no longer existing in anyone's mind. Stage 3, the rage, when the mask begins to crack. When every attempt fails, when you stay silent despite their sweetness, their apologies, or their threats, something inevitable happens. They begin to rage. Not because they love you or are truly heartbroken, but because they are losing control. For a narcissist, control is not just a habit, it is how they feel alive. Every time they can provoke a reaction, they feel powerful. But now, no matter what they say or do, you remain calm. No response, no emotion, no reaction. To them, that is the ultimate humiliation. Their ego, once fueled by your attention, is now a machine running out of fuel. And when power disappears, only fury remains. At first, they try to stay composed. They tell themselves they don't care, that they've moved on. But the more they repeat that story, the more furious they become. Because if they truly didn't care, why are they still watching you? Why does your silence sting like a personal challenge? They begin to seek ways to force a reaction at any cost. A late-night message, a sarcastic comment online, a vague hint that they've found someone new. Every move is a test to see if you still belong to them. When you continue not to respond, anger turns into humiliation. They feel exposed, dismissed, forgotten. They cannot bear the thought that someone they once manipulated now lives freely without them. This isn't just emotional pain, it's a direct assault on their ego. They need you to feel important, and now you've escaped their orbit. Without you, they lose direction, lose someone to blame, lose their audience. That rage is not strength, it's the cry of an ego collapsing. They might start attacking you, spreading rumors, twisting facts, trying to tarnish your name. They want you to hurt, because only when you hurt do they feel less weak. But if you stay silent, no reaction, no defense, they begin to exhaust themselves. Every blow they strike loses power when you refuse to play. When you leave the table, the game ends. What destroys them most is your calm, the one thing they cannot buy, control, or destroy. In that stillness, they realize something terrifying. They never truly had you. They only had power because you allowed it. Now that you no longer reflect the image they crave, their mask begins to crack. Behind the arrogance trembles a frightened, hollow soul. They may act indifferent, but deep down they know this rage isn't aimed at you, it's aimed at themselves, because they are now facing what they've always avoided, the void within. And that's the first moment they truly feel weak, not because they lost you, but because there's no one left to reflect the illusion they once called self. Stage 4. The silent revenge. When they try to destroy you from the shadows, when rage fails to provoke you, they shift to a new stage, silent retaliation. This is when they stop trying to pull you back and start plotting to make you pay for escaping. They no longer attack directly, they move in the dark, targeting your image, your reputation, and your surroundings. You'll notice something strange. Outwardly, they seem calm, even noble. They tell others that you changed, that you became cold, ungrateful, cruel, that you hurt them. But behind that facade lies a calculated campaign to control the narrative. Because for a narcissist, losing control over others is painful, but losing control over how others see them is unbearable. They begin rewriting the story not to understand, but to dominate it. They know they can't reach you anymore, so they reach those around you. A mutual friend suddenly becomes distant. A rumor appears. A vague post stirs suspicion. They don't need to prove you wrong, they just need to plant a seed of doubt and let others do the rest. Jung once said, when a person refuses to confront their own darkness, they project it onto others. And this is exactly that moment. Their inner shadow now falls directly on you. Every flaw, every wound, every part of themselves they despise, they now assign to you. They'll say you're selfish, dishonest, cruel. In their mind, it's the only way to preserve their victim image. But what they don't realize is that the more they try to control the story, the more their emptiness shows. Because truly peaceful people don't need to prove who's right or wrong. They can't comprehend your silence, why you don't defend yourself, why you don't fight back. That silence drives them mad because you've stepped out of their script entirely. And then, when the rumors fail to shake you, they begin to implode inside their own narrative. To maintain the victim image, they must keep retelling the same story until even they no longer know what's truth and what's fiction. People who once believed them start noticing the cracks, inconsistencies in their words, unease in their eyes whenever your name is mentioned. You don't need to do anything, they reveal themselves. Truth always has a quiet way of rising, especially when the liar runs out of people to blame. Stage 5. When you're gone, they finally see what they've lost. After the rage, after the manipulation, after all the meaningless revenge, a final truth emerges, an emptiness that cannot be filled. With no one left to control, no one to perform for, they're forced to face what they've avoided all their lives themselves. But unlike you, who walked through pain to find healing, they have no inner compass to guide them inward. Your silence once drove them crazy. Now it breaks them. Because it's no longer a psychological war, it's reality. You're gone. No waiting eyes, no emotional reaction, no dialogue left to draw energy from. They begin to feel small, faint, invisible. For a narcissist, not being seen is the same as not existing. Time passes, and they try to recreate their old sense of power with new relationships. But each time, everything moves faster and feels emptier. They repeat the same words they once told you, the same gestures that once charmed you, only to realize that no one reacts like you did. What they miss isn't you, but the reflection of themselves they once saw through you. But that mirror is gone, and no other mirror is clear enough for them to see who they are. This is where the real collapse begins. No more rage, no more act, only dense silence, where the memories they buried start to surface. The abandonment wounds, the fear of not being loved, the childhood pain, all of it returns at once. With no one left to blame, they drown in the emptiness they created. They may still smile, still appear confident, but in moments alone, when there's no audience, the mask falls. That's when they finally understand it wasn't you who destroyed them. It was the way they lived that made them lose everything. As for you, you've changed. You no longer hate, no longer need to win. You simply see the truth, There are no winners in this kind of war, only those who learn to stop fighting, and you did. You chose healing over revenge, freedom over proving, peace over power. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You've seen the darkness not only in them, but within yourself, and you walked out of it. They, however, remain trapped in their own maze, searching for your reflection in countless others, never realizing that what they seek was never outside of them. This stage has no climax, no drama, only a quiet ending. You have become someone they can neither control, replace, nor forget. Not because you are perfect, but because you have become real. And for them, that is the rarest thing in the world. Stage 6, awakening. When you no longer need them, everything changes. One day, you suddenly realize you don't think about them anymore. You don't feel anger, nor the urge to prove anything. There's only a strange stillness, something that once felt like emptiness, but now feels full, whole, and enough. You begin to see clearly that everything that happened wasn't a cruel destiny, but an initiation, a sacred ritual of awakening. Living with a narcissist, you slowly lost your sense of self, apologizing when you weren't wrong, trying when you weren't appreciated, loving when love wasn't returned. But through that pain, you learned something they never could, the power of awareness. When you stop searching for reasons behind their behavior, when you stop hoping they'll change, you turn inward, and that's where awakening begins. You realize they never truly possessed you. What they manipulated wasn't your soul, but your fear. The fear of being abandoned, of not being enough, of not being loved. Once you face those fears directly, their power dissolves. You begin to understand that freedom doesn't come when they leave. It comes when you stop reacting to them. From silence, you relearn your own language. You speak less, but every word carries weight. You choose relationships not from fear of loneliness, but from a desire to grow. You no longer chase anyone for validation, because you've learned to validate yourself by living in alignment with your truth each day. And then something miraculous happens. The world changes color, not because the outside has changed, but because your vision has. You start to find peace in small things, the morning coffee, sunlight through the window, a slow breath at the end of the day. You realize that true love is not an emotional addiction, but a state of consciousness, a space where no one owns anyone, and both are free to be themselves. Meanwhile, they remain stuck in the same loop, repeating the same role, the same fear, the same ending. But you no longer care. Not because you're cold, but because you understand that every soul has its own path to learn. You no longer need their regret, nor their recognition. True awakening is realizing that their validation no longer holds any meaning. Carl Jung once said, "True freedom does not come from defeating the darkness, but from no longer being ruled by it." And that is, you now no longer ruled by the past, by fear, or by the person who once hurt you. You've become calm not because you forgot, but because you finally understand. Awakening isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or glory. It comes quietly in the moment you smile and realize that every wound was just a lesson guiding you back to yourself, stronger, wiser, and no longer needing anyone to feel complete. You no longer look for them in anyone else, because now you found yourself. Stage 7, rebirth. When you no longer carry them in your story, one day you'll look back at everything, no pain, no anger, no need to explain. It will feel like watching an old movie you've seen too many times to be moved by it anymore. Their face, their voice, their words, sweet and cruel alike, are now just a closed chapter in your story of becoming. This stage is no longer about them, but about you, the person you've become after they left. Grounded, wise, and self-possessed. You no longer tell the story to seek sympathy, but to bring light to others who are still at the beginning of that same path. You no longer speak as a victim, but as someone who found their way out of the labyrinth. Rebirth doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from accepting everything that once was real. The pain, the mistakes, the fragility you once despised in yourself. You understand now that you don't have to erase the past to be free. You only need to see it through awakened eyes. Gratitude begins to bloom not for them, but for yourself, for not giving up. Because without them, you might never have learned how deeply you could love yourself, or discovered the quiet strength of patience, silence, and self-healing. The storm that once destroyed you has now become the initiation that birthed a new you, one who knows their boundaries, understands their worth, and no longer fears losing anyone. In that rebirth, you begin to love differently, not to fill a void, not to be seen, but because you are already full enough to share. New relationships come softly, not from destiny, but from discernment. You choose those who listen over those who promise, those who bring peace over those who excite chaos. People often mistake endings for loss, but for you, endings are how the universe renews the soul. You no longer need to play the role of the strong one who survived. You truly have survived. No more fighting, no more pretending, no more proving. You simply live real and serene. Jung once said, "No one can touch heaven unless they have first walked through their own hell." You have walked through that hell not to become an angel, but to understand that the light was never far away. It was always within you, waiting for your return. And when you finally smile back at your past, you no longer ask, "Why did they do that to me?" You simply whisper, "Thank you, because through that storm, I learned how to become peace." That is the sign of true rebirth, when they no longer hold any role in your story, and you begin writing the next chapter of your life with the pen of freedom, awareness, and light. When the journey ends, you are no longer the same person, no longer the one who stayed up all night waiting for a reply that never came, or who tried to find meaning in wounds that could never be justified. You've walked through the darkness not to prove your strength, but to realize that the light within you was never extinguished. The narcissists once believed they could destroy you, but in truth, they only unlocked a deeper version of you, one that knows when to stay silent, when to choose yourself without guilt, and how to love without losing your identity. The freedom you found didn't come from their disappearance, but from the moment you no longer needed them to feel worthy. Now, as you look back, it's no longer a battle of who won and who lost, because on the path of awakening, there are no enemies, only the fears we must face within ourselves. You understand now that every wound was a lesson, every loss a ritual of transformation, and every ending a return to your truest self. Carl Jung once said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You have seen the darkness in others and within yourself, and you no longer need to fight it. For those who have truly healed have nothing left to prove. They simply live present and radiant. This story, in the end, was never about the narcissist. It was about you, the one who broke free from the cycle, who chose awareness over reaction, peace over chaos. You didn't just survive, you were reborn. And standing here now in the light of your own consciousness, you understand, no storm can destroy a soul that has learned to stand within itself. You don't need them to return. You don't need their apology. You don't need their recognition. Because the most beautiful victory is not making someone regret losing you. It's being able to smile, free, and no longer carry them in your heart. This isn't just an ending. It's the beginning of a new life, one where you no longer seek the light outside yourself, because you have become the light.